on watching the streaming and doesn't know me, my name is David Levin-Kruss. I am the Director of Jewish Education for JDC and for Szarvas, and I'm very happy to give this class today. This class, the people I see in front of you on Zoom are part of a class that I regularly give called Yivanan. It's very exciting to have you in front of me and also to have people on the streaming. We're about to start the period of the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, which is in commemoration of the destruction of the temple. And always in this time of the year, you know, it's summer, it's hot, under normal circumstances, we want to go to the beach. Why suddenly have this 3 weeks of semi-mourning that leads up to Tisha B'Av? And another thing that often happens is I go to SzarvasCamp, and this is real, this is not just like a way to show people that I understand where people are coming from or don't understand in a certain case. Like sometimes I go to Szarvas and everybody there is, you know, similar to Europeans, other Europeans. They like to do the same things. They enjoy the same things. They like going out. And very often I start speaking to people and people carry a weight of historic memory. Like there is so much that people, young people are remembering, whether it is things to do with the Shoah, with the Holocaust, or the story of Israel, or whether it's got to do with history. There's a very powerful feeling that I sometimes have that people are remembering history, and it's very, very real. And as a Jewish educator, I suppose I should be very, very happy and proud that we have succeeded in transmitting such Jewish consciousness. And so as I say, even if the people have very broad shoulders, are their shoulders really broad enough to carry so much history? And this is a real question, by the way. You know, sometimes teachers will ask a provocative question, but come up with like a sweet answer at the end. I do have some type of an answer that I want to share at the end. And I do think it's a nice answer, so I'm not going to pretend. But the question is a real question. I'm not just asking a question for the fun of it. And the question I ask really is there such a thing as too much memory? Can we become so weighed down with remembering the past, especially the things that aren't nice about the past, that it actually becomes counterproductive to living a good life and to living a good Jewish life? Anybody who's on the Zoom have any question or comment before we move on? Okay, all good. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to share my PowerPoint that I made. Okay, so let's start. Just a second. So that is the question: too much memory, balance holding onto and letting go of the past. And we'll start. Of course, it's not going to work now. Just give me a second. So we're going to start off with one of the most powerful commentaries about or statements about memory. This is from the book of Dvarim, from the Torah. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. B'derech b'tzeitchem miMitzrayim. Amalek was this archetypal enemy of the Jewish people. They attacked for the pure fun of it. They didn't have any strategic reasons, economic reasons, political reasons to attack. They attacked for the pure joy of attacking. And in Jewish mind, they have become the archetypal enemy. And the mitzvah goes on to say something very, very anomalous. It goes on, it says, Timche et zecher Amalek, al tishkach. Blot out the memory of Amalek, don't forget. It's like introduction to Judaism. Block them out, get rid of them completely, but don't forget them. And already here in this statement, I think that we are brought to the ironic idea of what memory is. We don't want Amalek in our life. We want to create a world in which there aren't evil people, in which there isn't this type of evil for the fun of it, evil for the sake of it. We want to obliterate it from the world. On the other hand, at exactly the same time, we're being told to not forget it, for it to become part of your consciousness. And there are many, many different beautiful ways the Jewish tradition answers up. How can you, one hand, have Timche et Zecher Amalek, cross out, obliterate the memory of Amalek, al tishkach. don't forget. But for the moment, I just want us to sit with the problem of how can one blot something out and get rid of it, and also be required to remember it at the same time. Any questions or comments before we move on? So next text is a very different one that we're going to look at. Next text, okay, just a second. Next text is from Barbra Streisand. Zsuzsa isn't here tonight, but I know that Zsuzsa likes Barbra Streisand. I'm not quite sure it's a Jewish text, but she actually sang two songs. She didn't write either of them, but she sang two songs to do with memory, which we will begin and end with. This is from the movie The Way We Were, and we can't unfortunately play it because of copyright reasons. I'm not even sure I'm allowed to sing it because of copyright reasons, but that might be a good thing that I'm not allowed to sing it because of copyright reason. It is. Thank you, Aharon.
Sing it so we can understand the emphasis of the song.
Great, excellent. Good to have your support. So she wrote it in memories, like the corners of my mind, misty watercolored memories of the way we were. She's speaking about things that were, relationships that were. She says, can it be that it was all so simple then, or has time rewritten every line? And I think she says something very, very interesting over here, that sometimes when we look back and we speak about how life was so simple, it could really be that we've rewritten every line. They sometimes say that the reason that the good old days were so good is because of the bad old memory. And people sometimes do this in Jewish life. They will like speak about the shtetl as if it was the most wonderful place where, you know, everyone was dancing down to the village well, lighting candles while singing songs. And life was complicated then, life was difficult then, but we have a tendency sometimes to make history to be more glowing than it is, and also the opposite. Memories may be beautiful, and yet what's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. Now, on one level, this is true. We all do it. All of us have had upset, pain, disappointment in our lives. I don't like to speak in other people's names, but I don't believe there's anybody here who hasn't had upset, unhappiness at some point in their life. And it was real. And the pain is probably still there for some of the things. If we remembered them all the time, we would not be able to live. In order to live, we have to forget about certain pain or not bring it to the forefront every time. We would just not be able to go on if every single time I got up in the morning, I remembered how awful it was in grade 5 when X happened. And so we sort of forget, we put it to the side. On the other hand, I think Jewish culture is very good at getting us to remember the difficult parts as well. I mean, look, again, I'm not being critical, I'm pointing out, you know, even, you know, when we have Tisha B'Av camp, or when we have the Holocaust Day, the museum or something, and an evening program, even then, like I often say to myself, well, we'll see a quote about it next time, like, why? Why are we spoiling these kids a nice time by suddenly becoming odds? Go swim, we'll see, go swim in the pool. I think that might even be the next quote. Let's see what the next quote is. Let's see what the next one is. It is. So it's not by chance. It's not by chance. I'm going to stop the share just to speak to you. It's not by chance that many of the quotations that I've used tonight are from the history of Zionism, because really Zionism had to do this, what I just spoke about, very, very well. On the one hand, it had to continue the past. It was appealing to the Jewish people to come back to their ancient homeland. It had to appeal to the Jewish past. On the other hand, a lot of the Jewish past was about living in the diaspora and adapting and not being in charge of one's own destiny, and it needed a break. And Zionism really is a very, very interesting movement in that sense, in that when it suited it, it saw itself as being a continuation of the Jewish past. When it suited it. It said, no, we're doing something new. We're coming to the land. We're creating a new type of a Jewish person. When it suited it, it forgot the past. And in fact, a lot of what goes in Israel can be understood that way, of a people, excuse me, of a people who are hanging on to a past and rewriting it and rejecting it all at the same time. So this is this great quote from Chaim Hazaz, who was an Israeli novelist, and I'm not able to see it because I have your picture over there. Okay, let me just move it. He says, this is a famous thing, he said, I would simply forbid teaching our children Jewish history. Yutka cries out to his fellow kibbutzniks in protest. Why the devil teach them about our ancestors' shame? All that he can see Jewish history is pogrom after expulsion, after unhappiness. I would just say to them, boys, from the day we were exiled from our land, we've been a people without a history. Class dismissed. Go out and play football. In other words, he's saying there's no value in remembering the past. Kaspit is smiling. I like that. I mean, I like a smile anyway, but it's like, I think it's a smile of recognition. I'll ask you in a second. I'll ask you in a second to comment on it. But in the 1950s, for example, this is very, very much how history was taught in Israel. History ended when the Bible finished, and then you had like 2,000 years in which like nothing really happened, and then suddenly you had Zionism. The Israelis will appreciate it in the world of education. They call it from the Tanakh to the Palmach. That's what happened. You have the Tanakh, and then suddenly you have the Palmach, who were the early fighting forces of the Haganah. Kaspit, if you want to share, please share what you found interesting about this piece. You don't have to.
I just found it amusing that it was a kibbutznik, and I don't know, everything you said after. For a long time, I didn't really know what happened before World War II.
Yes.
So I understand this approach. I know it from my childhood.
Yeah, I don't. I'm really not doing this to say anything about myself, but I once gave on her birthright, for a few days they have Israeli soldiers on the group, and I once gave a very little piece in which I spoke about, the different trends in Zionism that I asked for. I remember one woman came up to me afterwards. She said to me, I just simply never learned the stuff. She says, now I understand why different things are, So we're seeing now, in fact, the other side of it. We're actually disproving my point, which I'm always happy to do that, which is to see how sometimes if one doesn't have one's history, sort of pieces are not there. You sometimes read novels like this or memoirs where there's some big secret in the family. And one day when the secret is suddenly revealed, suddenly people understand, oh my goodness, that's why we do that. And that's why we do this. And that also happens sometimes in Jewish life. When one doesn't have the historic memory, it can have great difficulties. But now at the moment, I'm not undoing my thesis yet. I'm still trying to prove it. Okay, just a second. Okay, there we have. So here we have a poem by Yehuda Amichai, very, very famous Israeli poet. I've asked Kaspit to read it, and we'll look at it in English afterwards. But the Hebrew is so beautiful, and whoever knows Hebrew, or even if you just can get a few words here and there, I think it's worth it. Kaspit?
Yes, so, שהר הזיכרון יזכור במקומי. זה תפקידו. שהגן לזכר יזכור. שהרחוב על שם יזכור. שהבניין הידוע יזכור. שבית התפילה על שם אלוהים יזכור. שספר התורה המתגלגל יזכור. שהיזכור יזכור. שהדגלים יזכרו, התכריכים הצבעוניים של ההיסטוריה, אשר הגופים שעטפו הפכו אבק. שהאבק יזכור. שהאשפה תזכור בשער. שהשליה תזכור. שחיית השדה ועוף השמיים יאכלו ויזכרו, שכולם יזכרו, כדי שאוכל לנוח.
Thank you very much, Kaspet. And I'll read it in English, then I'm going to ask for any comments that people might have. He writes, let the memorial hill remember instead of me. That's what it's here for. Let the park in memory of remember. Let the street that's named for remember. Let the well-known building remember. Let the synagogue that's named after God remember. Let the rolling Torah scroll remember. Let the prayer for the memory of the dead remember. Let the flags remember, those multicolored shrouds of history. The bodies they wrapped have long since turned to dust. Let the dust remember. Let the dung remember at the gate. Let the afterbirth remember. Let the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens eat and remember. Let them remember, so I can rest. Okay, I want to hear what people have to say, but I'm very, very interested as you were listening to the last lines when it says, let the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens eat and remember. Let them remember, so I can rest. What were you expecting? What were you expecting? Just give me, people, I'm really sorry to do this at such a poignant moment. Ayla, read my phone, please. It's my son is in, we're waiting for a corona test for my son. So they were supposed to call my wife's phone. So they just called my phone. Okay, when it said, let them all remember, let them remember so that I can, what word were people expecting after that? So that I can? People have any expectation? So
I can remember.
Let them, so you, oh, wow. You just explain a little bit?
So I was expecting, he's saying, okay, let's have all these things to help me remember, right? Let's have the memorial flag, the thing, the songs, like, for instance, fallen people for the country, soldiers. So let's have all of these ceremonies and songs and a day for memorials so we can remember them. So like, let's have all these artifacts and all these things to help us remember, and then we can remember the thing we want to be remembered, to help me remember.
Yeah, fair. So all of these would be like what we call in Hebrew avizarim, accessories in some way to remember. Exactly. Excellent. Anybody else expect a different word? Let them remember so that I can.
Maybe anyway, forget.
You say, tell me about that. You were saying that I can forget.
Maybe forget, yes.
Tell me why you were thinking forget.
Well, because it's hard to, I don't know, because maybe if you forget, then you can start a new thing. You can let it go.
Yeah. I think he's saying let all of these other things remember so they can do the remembering and I can just forget about it.
And continue into the future, not deal with the past all the time.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It's David.
Go ahead. You first, sorry.
People could say, like, there could be the thought, like, I think that, like, he meant when he's saying, so I can rest, is like, there's something else there. For instance, a father who is his son died in war. So if he has like a memorial or something for the son, it's as if his memory will live on forever, and it could take off the burden from him that he has the burden to live on, keep his son living instead of him.
Yeah, fair. Exactly, that somebody else can do it, not me. Anybody else have any comments, not about that? Anybody else have any comments about this poem that they wish to share? Anybody? I felt this once very strongly. We're in New Hampshire in the United States for Tisha B'Av. And it was like, wherever I walked, I was like, it was the day before Tisha B'Av. And it was like, like usually I'm in Israel or in some kind of Jewish community or at Szarvas, whatever the place might be. And like, I remember it was just ridiculous. I was walking around and I said, like, none of these people even know that it's Tisha B'Av tomorrow. None of these people is it even something in their life. And like, I really had this feeling of like, oh my goodness, what do I carry around with me? Let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this poem. I want to share some interesting things I think about it. Things that the beginning bit I think is very Israeli. It's, you know, in Israel, almost wherever you go, there's a park or a bench or a street or a building or a shul that's named after somebody who has died either in the war, in a Shoah, or in some other way. It's a country that's really, really has a lot of memorials. And it's interesting, it says, let the synagogue that's named after God remember. Because very often the synagogue might not be named after God, but actually it could be named after the person who died or a group of people who died. So he's playing a little bit with the God and with the people. He said, let the flag remember. And then he almost plays like a little, plays with us a little bit. He says those multicolored shrouds of history. A shroud is what a person is buried in. A Jew is traditionally buried in a shroud, and they're not multicolored, they're white. So he's fusing together the flags and the shroud, and he calls them multicolored shrouds of history. He says the bodies they wrapped have long since turned to dust. And he starts with memorial hills and streets, but he's becoming more and then he goes into religious things. But now he's really going to the physicality of it. He speaks about dust. He said, dust, let the dust remember. He says, let the dung remember at the gate. And that is a mention of Dung Gate, which is one of the gates of the old city of Jerusalem. He said, let the afterbirth remember what is left after the woman is given birth. Let that which is thrown away normally, let that remember. And then he goes all the way to the beginning of Exodus, the beginning of Genesis. He says, let the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven that were created by God eat and remember. Let them remember so I can rest. I think this is a poem of somebody who has many, many memories with him, and he almost feels if they're holding him down, they're bearing him down, and he says, I want to outsource it. I want somebody else to remember so I can just be like one of those people in New Hampshire. It's like some of you might know that part of the Jewish wedding ceremony, and to my mind, one of the most beautiful ones, is when it's usually the groom in a traditional ceremony, but it could be anybody. When the bridegroom says, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, and then stamp on the glass, and it's a memorial for the destruction of the temple and also for the bad things in the world and the bad things in the past. And like, to my mind, that is the most touching, most beautiful part of the wedding ceremony. I really like it. But there's something completely weird about it. This is your marriage day, and you're trampling on a glass and saying, oh, if I forget you, Jerusalem. This is an aside to do with absolutely nothing. But I think I've done very few weddings, but the first or the second wedding that I performed, I completely forgot. I just jumped over that part of the ceremony, and somebody said to me, David, the glass. And I went like this and said, I just forgot Jerusalem. So, but when you think about it, it's like, here it is, this happy moment. Your mind can be on many things, and suddenly we're told, remember the destruction of the temple. Any comments or questions before we move on? Anything? Just unmute yourself and speak if you want to.
Can I comment on the song?
Please go ahead. Yes.
That I think that we do all these ceremonies to remember, and we invest in them so much time. You can see it even in families that lost people of the family, they invest so much in order to remember and to give this the dignity and the space and everything. And for me, it's interesting that he says, let's give all these symbols, let's give them the, like, everything that's needed is there. It's in the symbols, and we don't really have to do the ceremonies and the talking and all the other things we do on top of the signals. How do you say?
Symbols.
Symbols, sorry.
Yes.
Symbols. So he doesn't say, I want to forget. This is enough for me to remember.
Yeah.
I don't have to work more.
It's interesting also, the phenomenon of Israelis going to Berlin is a very, very interesting one. And it's a very interesting, very nice community in many ways of Israelis who live in Berlin. And obviously everybody has their own reasons for going, and I'm not for me to speak in the name of other people. But I think sometimes there's a tremendous power for people to go to this place, which is the ultimate symbol of what Israel isn't in a way. And for many people, Israel is seen as a place, a refuge, a place that the Shoah will never happen again. And I think some people do find it very liberating to be able to say, I'm able to live in Berlin. I'm able to live in this place, which is, just so, it's always what we were taught was this terrible place. And I think part of it is just a desire, not everybody, and I can't, but I think it's almost a desire. And if anybody, especially on the streaming, if anybody hears me and violently disagrees with what I'm saying, don't be violent about it, but please write to me, send dlk@jdc.org, write to me, tell me how much you disagree with that. Okay, let's go on. Let's go on. Just a second. Okay, so so now we're beginning to move perhaps in the direction of understanding the value of memory. This is another Israeli story. The background of the story is that there is a grandfather who wants his grandchild to be named after his son who was killed in the Shoah. His son's name was Mendel, which is not the type of name that many modern Israelis, even observant, but certainly secular Israelis in the 1950s, were not going to call their child Mendel. So eventually the mother Rachel, she comes to her daughter Raya and she says, what about the name Menachem? She says, that would be a name which means to be comforted. And it sounds like Mendel. Again, the Israelis will back me up even today. Very few people would call their child Menachem. Maybe if you were ultra-Orthodox, you would call your child Menachem, but very few people who aren't. It's regarded as like an old-fashioned name. I don't know what in each of the languages that you speak, you've got one name like that, which is really an old name. So let's read what happens. This is by Aharon Meged, the name. Yad Vashem, it's called in Hebrew. Then Rachel came with a proposal for a compromise. The child should be named Menachem, a Hebrew name, she said, an Israeli one by all standards. Not sure that's true, but anyway. Even grandfather had agreed to it after much urging. Raya refused to listen. We have chosen a name, mother, she said, which we both like, and we won't change it for another. Menachem is a name which smells of old age, a name which for me is connected with sad memories and people. I don't like it. Rachel was silent. At last she said, and are you ready to take the responsibility of going against grandfather's wishes? I don't know. Perhaps we are obligated to remember the names of the dead in order to leave a tribute to them. But Raya answers, but I don't want to remember all those dreadful things, mother. Rachel understood. As if to herself, she said in a whisper, I don't know. At times it seems to me that it's not grandfather who's suffering from loss of memory, but ourselves, all of us. The grandfather has gotten older, he's forgotten, he's getting little bit of dementia, so he's forgotten the past. And this whole story is about memory and forgetting about. They named the child Ehud in the end, which is a biblical name, but has got a much stronger Israeli feel to it, especially in the 1950s. I have to say, for myself, and then I'm interested to hear if you have any comments on the story. For myself, I read this in high school. It was we had to read it. It was part of our Hebrew syllabus. But and I remember in high school, I was very much with the grandfather and with Rachel. Like, it's important to remember, and I do believe it, that we have amnesia. We are who we are because of our memories, all the stuff that we normally use. And it's interesting, as I'm older and closer to the age of Rachel, not to SzarvasCamp, but closer to the age of Rachel, I see the children more. Like, I understand more that children want to move away from their parents and forge their own way and don't want to be tied down by the background. I'm interested if anybody has any comments. Speak up. Usually, you know that I like to wait until somebody speaks, but because of the streaming, I don't want to do that. So if anybody has something, and I hope you do, about the story, please share it, about that little story. Anybody?
I think it's a little bit of conflict.
Yeah.
How much you want to live in the past and how much you want to just move forward. And it has to be in a balance, because if you live too much in the past, it's impossible to move forward. And even thinking, okay, we have the memory of the family and our grandparents and everything, then we might live the same way they did and not change enough. It starts with a name and it continues with, I don't know, traditions and ideas and way of living and where we are living. And then it will be, and I think the name is such a big thing in a culture that when you change names, you push the culture forward or wherever you want to push it. So it's like a basic thing, but it's so important.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very powerful thing. I heard somebody who had a very, very powerful metaphor for this, and it's in a Jewish context, but I think it applies to everybody. He said, it's almost like we are in a tube. We are in like a toilet roll, if you want, a big roll of napkins. On the one side is the Mount Sinai. On the one side is the giving of the Torah. And on the other side is the coming of the Mashiach. On the one hand is what we've inherited. On the other hand is what we want to build. Every step of the way, we are further from the past and closer to the future. So we have to work harder to remember the past, but also be working harder to bring a better future. And the question is, how do you do that? It's very easy to say balance, and the class was called balance. It's very easy to say, and balance isn't necessarily a bit of this and a bit of that. 50% of this and 50% of that isn't a balance. The question is, how does one synthesize these different things in a way that I have my memories, but my memories propel me forward rather than holding me back. Any questions or other comments besides Kaspit?
I think memory is not only about remembering people, or it's to take something from the past and see how it could help you. Like, not only remember a memory as a memory, but to see kind of what you could take from that memory. What's the lessons to be learned? And
correct.
Then it doesn't hold you back.
Yeah, fair. They're all different types of memory. So let's move on and see where we're going to go next. Okay, so this is a beautiful segue by Oren. This is on Purim. You can see these two little kids in their Purim costumes. On Purim, we read a scroll called Esther, the story of Esther, Queen Esther, who saved the Jewish people. And this is read in the evening and the morning. And in the Gemara, in the Talmud, it asks the question. This is a classic example of something where it looks like, oh my God, it's probably like a little bit of a boring piece, but I think this is fascinating. It says, beginning from where must a person read the Megillah in order to fulfill the obligation? The Megillah is quite long. It's like 9 chapters, I think. And it does take time. And, every time a man is mentioned, one bangs the floor, but still it takes a long time. I often feel like I get a little bored in the middle and wanted to go quicker. So the rabbis also had this issue. They didn't want to read all 9 chapters. Rabbi Meir says all of it. You need to read all of it. You need to understand the story, its context, its background. It starts off the story by giving the political background of what was happening in the court of Achashverosh. So Rabbi Meir says, you want to read the Megillah? You need to read everything. Rabbi Yehuda says, one need read only from there was a certain Jew. He says you don't need to read the whole book. You only have to read from where they start talking about Mordechai. Mordechai was the one who encouraged Esther and the Jewish people to fight against their fate. And he says that's where you need to start. Rabbi Yossi says you start reading from Achar HaDvarim Ha'eleh, after these things, from where Haman, who is the villain, says he's going to kill the Jews. And finally, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says one must start to read from on that night. That's when the story starts getting better, even though God is not mentioned in the Megillah. That's where you sort of, if you're a traditional believer, see God's hand in history. And I would like to claim that these are 4 different approaches to history. Rabbi Meir, I would say, is the academic approach. Know everything, know the background, know the details. The more you know, the better you understand it. Rabbi Yehuda says history is not about the bad things that happened to Jews, but how Jews reacted to them. Rabbi Yossi says Jewish history is about the bad things that happened to us. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says history is about seeing the purpose and the meaning in history. And I would like to claim that it's not black and white. It's not memory versus non-memory. It's not how much memory versus how little memory. It's not even, although Kaspit said it so beautifully, and she's of course right, that it needs to be balanced or synthesized. All of these things are true. But I think there's something even deeper going on like that. And that is, which history do you remember? Is it academic history where I'm interested in it for knowledge? Is it the history of the Jews as one pogrom and one suffering after another? Is the history about how we reacted and acted in history, the different things that Jews did in order not only to survive, but to flourish and to thrive? And finally, do you look back at history and say, this isn't just things that happened, it is meaning, it is understanding, and I am the one. This is what's interesting about the last position, is he is the one who decides to give it meaning. History, very, very often, the things happened, but we're the ones who decide what to do with it. So I would like to claim that the answer to this question of, what happens during the 3 weeks, why do we remember all these things? I don't believe that the first part of this class that I gave was just to, be provocative or whatever the case might be. I really think that one can get weighed down by looking back at history and Jewish history and thinking of it as one pogrom, one suffering, one victimization after another. And the reason the early Zionists were so against it is they felt it didn't create people who were proactive and acted upon the world. On the other hand, if we forget it, we can become like Raya, where the history just becomes irrelevant, or even like what Kaspet said, like she had to work to try and find back pieces of her because her past wasn't given to her all of it. By putting words in your mouth or exaggerating, I apologize, but that's the point. And there's something unhealthy about that also. And I'd like to claim that it's not about memory versus non-memory. It's about what memory I remember. How do I deal with it? What do I do with it? Questions or comments? Anything that people have to say? Okay, so let's have a look. Let's have a look at the last one. We'll leave that one out. And let's have a look over here. Actually, let's not leave it out. This is the famous lines from the Haggadah. B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo, ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, a person should see themselves as if they left Egypt. And I think that what this demonstrates is the idea that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's something for us to experience exactly like what Aharon said, so that we can take something from it and do something with it, that because this happened to me in history, I therefore behave that way. And hopefully it's in a positive and a good way. And we'll finish off with Barbra Streisand again. This is from the stage play Cats, where she popularized, I should say, another song where very different from the way we were. She says, just to quote two lines or two verses, she says, I remember the time I knew what happiness was. Let the memory live again. There are many, many wonderful Jewish memories. It's not all like I exaggerated in a way. There are many, many wonderful Jewish memories, and those memories can live again. And then she says, when the dawn comes, tonight will be a memory too, and a new day will begin. And I think that this is one of the things that I love so much. And I often feel this when I walk around Szarvas, that we're sitting and we're creating these wonderful Jewish memories that people are going to have. So many people in this world, and I'm sure people listening on Facebook, people sitting over here, our memories were created by summer camp or wonderful, positive things that we had. And I think that one of the most powerful things to remember is that we are all co-creators for other people and for ourselves of wonderful, wonderful Jewish memories. And hopefully when people think about memories, they will think about the wonderful things that we are involved in, rather than in addition to, I should say, some of the more tough things that have gone on in history. Any questions or comments? Anything? So thank you all very, very much for joining this evening. It was a little later for my regular class than usual, but I appreciate you coming. And for those people, we'll see you next month in our class. For people who are listening, watching on Facebook, hope you enjoyed. Please make comments. You can put it in the chat and I promise to read it, or you can write to me and I'll be very, very interested to respond. And for those people who in some way the 3 weeks is part of their life leading to Shabbat Av, I hope you have some meaningful thoughts and ideas about it. And I hope and I wish on all of us that it starts on Thursday, the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, that we use the time not to feel sad, but to try and remember the strength and resilience that we have had in Jewish history and how we can draw upon that and use it now. I think we could all do with a lot of strength and resilience for very, very different types of reasons. So be well, everybody. Thank you all very, very much for joining. And I hope we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.